Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gareth Charter. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at MassLive and MassLive Media. I'm joined today by George Kuhn, who's the President of Drive Research, our research partner, and we're really pleased to have you all join us here today. MassLive.com, our news site, has been covering the cannabis industry and news in the cannabis industry for 6+ years now. I think folks in the state and in New England have come to understand that they can get reliable information and know what's new, what's happening in the cannabis industry on our new site, MassLive.com, and we're proud of that. MassLive Media is our full digital marketing agency brand. We work with clients in a whole variety of industries, but have gone really deep in the cannabis industry in the past several years. Dozens and dozens of clients that we've worked with, ranging from medical and adult use dispensaries to even ancillary industries like higher education and banking. We decided a year ago that we would do some research that adult use cannabis in Massachusetts had now reached the point that it would be interesting to go out and talk to cannabis consumers and find out what's on their mind and find out what they thought of the industry, find out why they were making their buying decisions the way that they were making them now that they had many choices throughout the state. And we got some really fascinating results a year ago and made that part of a presentation a year ago and have continued to talk with folks in the industry about what that research showed. Then we decided we should do it again, and we're going to do it regularly. So today we're going to reveal the results of our latest research and survey, because it's interesting to see what's changed in a year's time and to see how the cannabis consumer in Massachusetts is feeling today, what things have changed and how it compares to a year ago. We hope that this is informative to folks that work in the industry or are working around the industry or thinking of getting into the industry. We use it to inform digital marketing strategies and other marketing strategies for our clients and help guide our clients as to smart, effective marketing based on what the data says about consumers. So we're excited to reveal some of that today. I'm going to turn it over to George now, and we'll have some time at the end of this for some questions and answers. And then please, if there are more questions you have or you want to take this conversation in other directions after you get this information today, please contact us and we'll have our contact information here at the end of the presentation. So we're going to be a tight 30 minutes here and try and leave some time for questions and answers. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to George Kuhn from Drive Research.
Thanks, Gareth. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on the webinar. So as Gareth said, I'm George Kuhn, owner and president of Drive Research. We're a qual and quant market research firm based here in Syracuse. We work with brands across the country. And to echo Gareth's statement, we're really excited again to partner with MassLive Media again on this research. So we have a lot to cover in 30 minutes here, a bunch of insights around cannabis consumer behavior, cannabis choices, dispensary trends, and some information on delivery services as well. As I always say with our surveys, some of these results will probably validate some of what you thought you knew. Some of the results will surprise you a bit too as well. So in addition to the findings, I'll share some thoughts and recommendations on how to interpret the results at the end of the webinar, just some takeaways that I had. So we have a lot to get through in a half hour. Like Gareth said, we like to save a few minutes for questions and answers at the end. And if we can't get to those, I'll work with Gareth and MassLive to make sure we respond to those after the webinar. So here's our agenda for the day. We'll provide you with an overview of the background of the survey, including some of the geographies, number of responses. I always think that helps to just help you understand the ins and outs of the survey and add some context. We'll share a profile of our respondents, some consumption trends, factors in choice when purchasing cannabis, and the final portion of the presentation will touch on some dispensary-specific behavior trends, barriers, and drivers to delivery service appeal, and some data on just marketing dispensaries. So with any good research, this answered a lot of questions, but also raised some new questions we'd love to have answers to. That's the beauty of doing this on a yearly basis, is we can evolve the study a bit. There's never been a survey we've run where we haven't had a couple of additional questions that we want answered. So we'll do our best to address those through the Q&A and some interpretations of the data on the back end. So this was our second annual cannabis survey where we partnered with MassLive Media. So this really is nice because it gives us an additional layer of insight to compare the results as we trend from 2020 to 2021. So much of the methodology and the questions were replicated from the 2020 study, but we included some new questions around delivery service and some other topics. So we won't be able to touch on all 29 of the questions in the half hour today, so I encourage you to reach out to Gareth and MassLive, get some additional details and some other information we collected that we may not touch upon. Nonetheless, in total, we asked about 30 questions. The survey took 5 to 7 minutes to complete. We obtained 400 responses from residents in Massachusetts. This was the second consecutive year we reached that sample size. Results were collected from August 18th through the 30th this past summer. Not to get too much into the weeds, but 400 completed surveys does offer a pretty high degree of statistical reliability. The margin of error for that is about plus or minus 5%. So really strong reliability in the data we're looking at today. So although all the responses came from Massachusetts residents, as you kind of look through this data and we walk through this, I encourage you to really review these results more broadly. Other states have similar cannabis landscapes to Mass. Consumer behavior trends that we look through in this report can be broadly applied to consumers in the Northeast in general, really across the country. Consumer behavior is very much consumer behavior. So a little bit more on the profile of our respondents. Here's a closer look at that. So in the 2021 study, we worked to obtain a natural fallout of respondents. This was to ensure just representation of the sample, make sure we obtain feedback from many different audiences and demographics. So this included a mix of age groups. You'll see throughout this presentation, we'll call attention to differences by age groups using some of those icons on the right. So those are some generational breakdowns to compare insights by each generation. We also obtained a mix of Western and Central Mass and Eastern Mass respondents. So the majority of the respondents were from Eastern Mass, not too surprising with Boston and some of the suburb population centers being located there. Obtained a mix of children in the household. All respondents were required to have used cannabis in the past 12 months and to have shopped at a cannabis dispensary in the past 12 months. So we included a mix of recreational and medical users and a natural fall of enthusiasts and non-enthusiasts of cannabis. So when I say enthusiast, that was considered someone who used cannabis a few times a week or more. So now for the results. Interestingly, here right out of the gate, we saw a shift in consumption of cannabis from 2020 to 2021. So what we see here is edibles overtook smoking as the most common form of consumption among consumers. So edibles grew by 12 percentage points in the past 12 months, whereas smoking remained steady at about 77, 78%. So both of those consumption methods were nearly twice as common as any other form of consumption, including vaporizing. Also to note here, some nice generational breaks. Gen Z and Gen X were more likely to mention smoking as the top form of consumption, whereas millennials and boomers were more likely to mention edibles. So dabbing, tinctures, capsules, sprays, all used by about 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 or less. All forms that actually decreased a little bit in usage over the past year. And lastly here, we also found that our enthusiasts, again, those who use cannabis a few times a week or more, were more likely to be smoking, twice as likely as non-enthusiasts to be vaporizing as well. So a few different consumption methods there for some of the enthusiasts. So getting into the usage of cannabis, how often do consumers use cannabis? So what we found here is nearly half of our sample of consumers use cannabis every day, 48%. So you'll see the other half of respondents report varied usage from once every few days through those reporting using less often than once a month. Another insight here is that everyday users increased from 37% all the way up to 48% in 2021 when comparing that with last year's data. So as cannabis becomes more normalized in the mass market, more available in Massachusetts, it's resulting in increased daily usage. We see the jump in that number here on this slide. So it continues to be a really massively growing market in terms of both new users and also users consuming more. And really, when you look at other industries and other products, there's not too many you could say that about where, any type of product industry where you see a shift of more than 10% growth in everyday users year over year. So not too surprisingly, here are some other tidbits. We found that medical or medicinal users were more likely than recreational users to consume every day. It's kind of more of a maintenance for their health condition, perhaps. And supporting that insight of increased daily users, we found that 1 in 3 respondents expected to increase their cannabis usage over the next 2 years. So that trend of more common usage is expected to increase in both the short term and the long term. Some other thoughts on this slide here too with the call out. So in the survey, we covered reasons why consumers do not use cannabis more often. So we gave them a list of potential response options to select from there. And the top barriers included not liking cannabis enough to use it more, cannabis being too expensive, and cannabis being too inconvenient to purchase. So a few different cuts and icons that we look at here, the map of Massachusetts. So what that means is we highlighted the eastern portion of Massachusetts, the black there, for those areas in the bottom right. We found those residing in Eastern Mass were more likely to report cannabis being too expensive and too inconvenient to purchase compared to those in Western and Central Mass. Cannabis being too expensive and not liking it enough to use it more frequently was most often a concern for Gen Z. We see that call out there. A few other tidbits on this, and again, this is where it helps to kind of look through some of the charts and graphs that we could share, as a follow-up. A few other slide notes here. We found that the expensive cannabis was more of a barrier for recreational users versus medical users. And we also asked about the barrier of the stigma associated with cannabis usage. So that was listed as a barrier as well in these sections. Interestingly, the stigma being mentioned as a barrier in using dropped from 14% all the way down to 9% from 2020 to 2021, meaning the usage of cannabis, it's just being more widely accepted. The stigma as a barrier was reported by more of residents in Western Mass when compared to Eastern Mass as well. So some nice little factoids there coupled with that. So getting into factors of choice of dispensaries. So let's dive into this a little bit, factors and drivers to choice when purchasing cannabis. So some interesting findings here. So we first asked this as an open-ended question, which is the graphic you see on the left in the word cloud. So what the word cloud does is it reveals the words and phrases used most by respondents in the larger font. So larger font equates to more mentions. So some of the items that immediately pop here in terms of drivers of choice of dispensaries, at a glance, price, quality, location. We see some other kind of smaller fonts, less important factors that were mentioned top of mind, including product, variety, convenience, strain, THC popped out there. And to couple with the unaided question, we also asked a follow-up where we provided them a list to select from. So you see that on the right side of the slide. Very similar themes here. We see price, high quality products in stock, available product selections, and closest distance to my home or work as the most important. Those 4 categories were the only 4 selected by over half of the respondents. So a different look here with the trending with the colored bars. So this was to compare 2020 to 2021. So 2020 being in red and 2021 being in gray. And the largest difference in change from 2020 to 2021 was clearly price. Nearly 10% more of consumers chose price as the #1 factor in choice compared to 12 months ago. So clearly the cannabis consumer in mass and really across the country in these evolving markets is becoming more price conscious as more options and availabilities pop up in their market. So in fact, most of the factors in choice here increased from 2020 to 21, which tells me consumers are really getting smarter. They're getting more choosy in terms of selection versus taking whatever they can get access to maybe a few years ago. Some other breaks by audience here that we found interesting. High quality products in stock was a top factor in choice among boomers and older age groups. So high quality products matters more to that older age group, more interested in getting better quality cannabis. So this older age group was also significantly more likely to state the ease of access of getting in and out of the dispensary as a factor in choice compared to the younger generations. So those people complaining about, dispensary parking or traffic, those tend to be the older age groups. They want easy access. And lastly, here we also took a look at these factors for enthusiasts versus non-enthusiasts of cannabis. And what we found there is price and quality continue to be a top of mind factor for enthusiasts. However, location is really a significant driver among non-enthusiasts. So non-enthusiasts are those who consume, once a week or less often. So if you think about that, that really makes sense. Non-enthusiasts are visiting dispensaries less often. So convenience really plays a significant factor there for those non-enthusiasts. They're willing to, the enthusiasts are willing to put up with some of the other factors to access cannabis, even if it's not convenient. So moving into the next slide here, it showcases a question about how consumers feel when shopping at a dispensary. So really understanding their moods, their needs, helps dispensaries better relate, understand their consumer base. So some top choices and feelings for emotions. So those were led by friendly, easy, welcomed, safe, approachable, and supported. So something to keep in mind as competition increases with dispensaries, it's important to keep these items in mind, help train your staff if you do own or manage a dispensary. Interestingly, many of these feelings and emotions increased from 2020 to 2021. Support grew 7 percentage points. So what this means is staff is perhaps being more helpful in terms of giving support, helping consumers decide on products, which seems to be noticed and appreciated by consumers based on these survey results. So some of the call out boxes we see there on the right. So these address brand loyalty metrics for both the dispensary of choice and the brand of choice for cannabis to compare the two. So brand loyalty among dispensaries actually decreased from 48% to 37% from last year to this year, which means consumers are becoming less and less loyal to their favorite dispensary. So as more and more options pop up, new brands, new choices, better prices available, does seem to be impacting loyalty as consumers are more willing to shop around now than they were last year. So a new metric we also captured in 2021 was the loyalty of the brand of cannabis they use most often. So in relation to brand loyalty of dispensaries, this was slightly lower, 32% compared to 37%. So based on this initial comparison from these results in 2021, what this tells us is consumers are slightly more loyal to their dispensaries over cannabis brands, which we found was interesting. Lastly, a few other notes here. We found medical users are more likely to be brand loyal to their brand of cannabis. And we also found those in Western and Central Mass are more likely to be loyal to a brand of cannabis as well. So home delivery service, this was kind of an emerging trend and a new topic in Mass that we addressed in this year's surveys. So we started this section of the survey by simply asking about the appeal of home delivery services to consumers in Mass. So what we found there is nearly 2 in 3 stated it was appealing on that 4 to 5. They listed it as a 4 to 5 on the 1 to 5 scale. So what we found is younger age groups, Gen Z, millennials, were more likely to rate this service as being very appealing. Also those in Eastern Mass as well, those in the Boston and surrounding suburbs, found the delivery services much more appealing than those in Western and Central Mass. So we followed up that appeal question by a couple follow-up questions to understand what made it appealing or what made it more or less appealing to these audiences. So topping the reasons of why it's appealing, really driven by convenience and time savings of the delivery service, mentioned by half of the consumers. So we included some other choices as well in terms of drivers to appeal. Some interesting notes there. What we found is baby boomers and Gen X, a little bit of those older age groups when compared to Gen Z and millennials. Those older age groups were more likely to mention better privacy when it comes to more appealing aspects of the delivery. So What that tells us is the older age groups appear to like kind of more the private nature of the delivery versus having to go and purchase in person. So what we found in terms of aspects that were least appealing about delivery, 4 and 10 mentioned the additional costs. So this included costs for shipping, taxes. So this really directly relates to consumers being more cost conscious with cannabis choices, which we saw in some of the earlier findings that we covered. We also had some other choices on here, really not too much pop there. We did see risks of incorrect or incomplete orders, about 17%. Was really the only other factor that was driving down appeal of perhaps using delivery services. That was the only other factor mentioned by more than 15%. So recreational users and baby boomers were most likely to select neighbors being aware of the delivery as the least appealing part of the cannabis service. So this again really ties back to older age groups wanting their cannabis usage to be more private than some of the younger age groups, some of that Gen Z audience. So what would influence you to try a dispensary is what we cover on this next slide. So we ask consumers influence to try a dispensary. The only item that we found that would influence more than half of consumers would be sales or deals on products, referenced by nearly 2 in 3 consumers. Those in Western and Central Mass were also more likely to be influenced by sales or deals. Other less common influencers included offering a new high quality brand, online mobile ordering system for pickup, and the dispensary just being new or different, just wanted to go and check it out. Not surprisingly, here we found Gen Z and the millennial audience were more likely to be influenced by a dispensary offering online or mobile ordering for pickup. That's a real digital friendly audience, that younger age group. We also found enthusiasts were more likely to state a new high quality brand would influence their decision to try a new dispensary. So some interesting findings on that slide. So best sources to learn about a dispensary. Last slide here before we move into key takeaways. But this showcases the best ways for consumers to learn about a dispensary. How do they want to learn about a dispensary? It's showcased here in this bar chart. So top choices included social media, online research and advertising, personal relationships as a third. Interesting to note here, top 2 choices, both digital. So we asked this question in 2020. So there's increases and decreases that you see there in the arrows. That's what we're highlighting there. We saw an increase in social media as a source, as well as traditional media. And that's really just consumers, I think, becoming more aware, being more comfortable with the concept of marketing cannabis as a product. So we saw a decrease in personal relationships, which seems to make sense as the cannabis consumer becomes more educated, more knowledgeable about their options and preferences, less likely to be influenced by others. And we also saw Gen Z was more likely to state personal relationships as the best way to learn about a new cannabis dispensary, maybe from their younger network, not as much experience with cannabis, more likely to be influenced by their friends. So wrapping up here in the final few minutes, a few takeaways before we save a few minutes for Garrett to wrap up and do some Q&A. I always find these are helpful. There's a lot to kind of soak in, even in a half hour. Here's 2 or 3 things that I kind of would take away from this. Our first takeaway here, the cannabis consumer landscape, really a much more competitive space than it was a year ago. Cannabis consumers are much more comfortable, much more experienced, more choosy, more price conscious. Loyalty to dispensaries is decreasing as consumers become more open to getting products, better quality, low prices, something that's more convenient through in-person or through delivery. So just a more competitive landscape. Second, consumers are using cannabis more frequently. We saw an increase in daily users year over year and increased expected usage in the next 2 years. Something we did not dip into in these slides that was also a fact that we're seeing with some of the data is an increased influx of new users, those who weren't consuming cannabis 5 years ago. We saw an increase in that. So we see new consumers entering the market, testing the waters, maybe seeking guidance and consultation while they're on site in the dispensary. So this really speaks to building a relationship from the get-go, trying to build that loyalty. It's crucial to help support and consult them in store. And lastly, third, consumers want deals and sales. That was clear from that chart we looked at. With so many choices out there, brands and dispensaries compared to a year ago, consumers are really seeking those differentiators to switch to try a new dispensary, they can be influenced by marketing. You know, it's a tricky space to play in, but make sure your website highlights those differentiators, reasons they should choose you over others. Absolutely encourage you to chat with MassLive to understand how to leverage some of their experience and subject matter expertise in the area to help your dispensary or brand. You know, when consumers seek you out digitally, make sure the information is easily accessible on your website and findable through SEO. As we saw in those slides, digital is really the most common way they want to learn about new dispensaries, and these consumers will be seeking options online. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to Gareth at MassLive for some wrap up and some Q&A with our remaining few minutes.
Thank you, George. Terrific, just terrific, terrific information, and you kept it tight and respectful of people's time. Real quick, we'll see if there's any questions. I also want to alert you all to 2 events we have coming up, additional online remote events, which are more B2B focused. We have the New York Cannabis Insider event, and then the Cannabis Insider event for New England, coming up on October 28th and November 10th. These are aimed to be more B2B type events where the programming will be focused on helping businesses do business in this space. But I'm sure lots of you on today's webinar would find these interesting as well. Longer events, breakout panels, things of that nature. So you see the registration information there on your screen. And of course, you can reach out directly to us for more information on these upcoming events. We did see one question in the chat about getting a little bit more granular on this. You know, please reach out to myself or other members of our team if you have their contact information. And we'd be happy to set up some time to go deeper with you. Any other questions, either in the chat or I don't know if people can come off mute, Lindsay? Just pause here for a moment and see if there are any.
I don't see any questions in the chat right now.
Okay. I'll just wrap up while folks are thinking. If you have a question that you want to ask in the group session, or of course you can reach out to us directly with your question. A couple high-level takeaways for us at our team here at MassLive Media. With the information that George presented about what we're seeing change year over year, I think there's 2 main takeaways when it comes to your marketing and how you should be thinking about this if you're in space. A lot of marketing that we have seen to date has been focused on awareness, top of the funnel. Hey, did you know there's a dispensary here? Lots of billboard advertising. I think what you see from the research is 2 things, 2 opportunities. There's the opportunity to compete better for the discerning cannabis consumer. The consumer is becoming more discerning on a number of criteria. So you need to compete there and you need to market to that more discerning consumer. And then the second one is the lowering of stigma and the opening up of the marketplace and the entry of more people into the marketplace. And that, in our opinion, requires education. So if you're thinking about your marketing strategies, we would recommend more marketing investment and time go into mid and lower funnel strategies to work on the discerning consumer and what are the criteria that they're making their decisions on, and then simultaneously do more education. The days of, is there a cannabis dispensary near me? We passed that point in Massachusetts, okay? Yeah, maybe there's some appeal for a tourist driving through the state to realize that there's one off the next exit, but for most of the consumers in Massachusetts, we're pretty familiar with it now. So work on education to lower the stigma and broaden the marketplace for more people to come into the cannabis space. And for those that are already in the cannabis space, focus your marketing mid and lower funnel tactics that will help compete against others and appeal to the different discernments that cannabis consumers are making. Those are our major takeaways from the research. Again, happy to go much deeper with anybody who wants to reach out to us directly. My email's there, gcharter@masslive.com, and can even connect you with George, as you see George's email address there too. That said, we want to be very respectful of people's times. I see it's 11:31, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to talking to you again down the road, and continuing to put out this kind of research to help everyone in the industry. Have a great day, everybody.